Story 1. I was dead for 6 minutes. I was lying on the gurney and growing colder. Then my body started warming, and everything became calm and peaceful. I was no longer in pain. All the noise from the emergency room went away. It was very peaceful. I thought about my daughter and remembered all the things we had done. Slowly it faded to black and nothingness. There was no awareness of anything. I would describe it as being like before I was born. Then the worst thing happened, being revived. I started hearing loud noises and felt intense pain. Then came the worst stench, as if every dead animal had crawled into my nose. The smell was so bad I started vomiting. I remember the doctors turning me on my side and my vomit spraying onto a nurse. Dying was the most pleasant thing I have ever experienced, and being revived was the worst. Story 2. This was not the ideal post to find during my nightly existential crisis. Story 3. Not really sure what happened, and it still freaks me out to this day. My daughter was 4 and developed pneumonia. Her breathing would stop in her sleep, so we took her to the emergency room. She was there for 5 days. For the first 3 days, her health kept deteriorating. On the 3rd day, my girlfriend got a call that her mother had collapsed and been taken to the hospital. Her mother had been without oxygen for 20 minutes and was declared brain dead. That night, my daughter woke up and asked about her grandmother. No one had said anything to her or been in the room with her. We asked what she meant. She told us that her grandmother had come to her in a dream and said it was not her time yet and that she would go instead. Immediately the next day, she was almost completely recovered. Story 4. There are researchers who have collected and quantified data on near-death experiences for years. They have created 6 categories or stages that generally summarize most experiences. 1. Hellish experience. This can be a mildly uncomfortable state, a cold, dark, damp, loveless environment, or the traditional flames and devil scenario. Sometimes people say they are drawn out of this realm by an indescribable love. Few people recount this. 2. Out-of-body travel. The person has an out-of-body perspective and can travel freely. Often this occurs during surgery when the heart has stopped and doctors are working to revive the patient. The individual may be able to visit other rooms in the hospital or travel across the country. If they remain near their body, they do not always recognize their own body on the table and can feel confused. Note that reports of near-death experiences increased after the 1960s when resuscitation techniques became more advanced. 3. Blissful, warm darkness. This is an indescribable nothingness that feels comfortable, often without memory or any clear sense of consciousness. 4. Warm, distant light. This is similar to the previous category, but includes a distant light that emanates warmth, love, and forgiveness. The individual is attracted to the light and moves toward it, or the light comes to them. It is said to feel increasingly better the closer one draws to the light. This likely explains the phrase go or do not go to the light. 5. Passage beyond the light. After passing through the light, the person experiences an overwhelming state of love, compassion, and forgiveness that is difficult to put into words. They sometimes encounter a guide, which may be an anonymous loving being or a religious figure. This can be influenced by the person's beliefs but is not always tied to them. This experience is sometimes accompanied by beautiful music. The guide may present the person to loved ones or show a life review, which is common among near-death experiencers. At this point, the person may decide or be told to return to their body because they have work left to accomplish in life. 6. Unity with the universe. A smaller number of people report a state that goes beyond love and known consciousness. They describe becoming one with the universe or a universal energy that unites everything, sometimes identified as God. They say they understand everything and that knowledge is accessed instantly by thinking of a topic. People use different words to describe these experiences, but they typically agree that words cannot fully explain their encounter. Most reports are overwhelmingly pleasant. People often lose fear of death and long to return to the state, yet they know they must remain alive. My review of near-death experience accounts shows that most fall into these categories. If you research near-death experiences, come to your own conclusions. Consider whether anyone is trying to promote a particular belief. I believe that people sincerely report their experiences, but whether you accept them is your judgment. Some videos and talks about near-death experiences appear rehearsed or inauthentic. Take what you find useful. I have studied the topic and am happy to discuss it or suggest places to begin your research. Story 5. I think about death constantly. I cry about it too. I am terrified of dying, of what comes after, and of losing people I love. This thread has made me feel a bit better about it, so thank you to the original poster. I lost my mother last year, and I remember her telling me when I was little, because I would say at first, that she was scared to die. I am glad to know that it is not as bad as we both thought. Story 6. I had anaphylaxis and stopped breathing. I assumed the hallucinations were due to a hypoxic episode until I told my mom what I had seen. A middle-aged man who was not in scrubs stood at the end of my bed while the staff were running around. I had a nonverbal conversation with him. He told me to calm down and focus on breathing. He wore a tropical-style button-down shirt and an old newsboy cap, and he had a very pleasant demeanor. My mother showed me a photo of my grandfather that I had never seen before, and it was the same man at the foot of my bed. He had died before I was born. Edit. I did not expect this to comfort so many people. Remember not to worry too much about death, and try to enjoy your life while you have it. Story 7. A friend described the experience as deeply relaxing. She felt herself drifting away but was brought back just as she was ready to leave. After that, she embraced life and death. She said she does not fear death anymore because it was so relaxing to experience. Story 8. My girlfriend is anaphylactic, triggered by a chemical called salicylate, which is found in many foods. In high school, she had her first major reaction. The school nurses refused to administer her EpiPen, an epinephrine autoinjector, until the ambulance arrived. Anaphylactic reactions do not leave much time, so by the time the ambulance reached the school, she was in very bad shape and barely conscious. The paramedics administered one of her EpiPens, called the nurses fucking twats, and loaded her into the ambulance as her mother arrived. She continued to deteriorate, so they gave her a direct injection of epinephrine. It had no effect. They gave a second direct injection, and about 30 seconds later it hit her all at once and her heart failed. She stopped breathing and had no pulse. For about 2 minutes and 46 seconds, she was clinically dead. The scariest thing is that she experienced nothing. She says that when you are losing consciousness, you cannot tell the difference between waves of drowsiness and when your body actually shuts down. All she saw was the darkness of her eyelids. It felt like an extremely calm sleep in which she could not hear or feel anything, and she did not mind it. This was despite her mother and the paramedics screaming at her to keep her eyes open while the ambulance sped toward the hospital. She miraculously returned to life almost 3 minutes later while they were giving chest compressions. The cardiologist who assessed her later said that all the epinephrine in her body had been enough not only to stop her heart but also to restart it, with the small help of the paramedic pumping her chest. To this day, she cannot tell the difference between falling asleep after a long day and dying. Story 9. Everyone seems to agree that death was euphoric. That is comforting to hear. Thank you, everyone. Story 10. I overdosed and flatlined. I did not see anything. When they gave me naloxone, commonly known as Narcan, I woke up very angry, ripping intravenous lines from my arms and cursing at the compassionate staff who had saved my life. This happened 6 years ago, and I am fortunate to have that behind me now. Story 11. A black void. Then I woke up in the emergency room, surrounded by people running around. I felt very cold, but in reality I was just room temperature. I should add that it was relatively peaceful, like being wrapped in a big warm blanket. Story 12. My wife and I discussed this at length. 4 years ago, she died twice in 3 months and required full resuscitation both times. Both resuscitations were lengthy. One was intermittent for nearly 40 minutes. When she had recovered, I asked if she remembered anything during the times she was clinically dead. She remembered nothing, only blackness. No light, no relatives or pets waiting for her. Fortunately, she felt no pain. She finally died 18 months ago, and I hope she had no pain or worry the final time. It began with 2 spontaneous brain bleeds and underlying lupus. The first brain bleed caused her to pass, but they performed a craniotomy and revived her. Then she had a rebleed. The trauma caused her lupus to flare, which led to complete kidney failure and another cardiac arrest with recovery, followed by 2 strokes. She recovered enough to return home and be mostly independent, but she required dialysis 3 times a week for 3 years. She passed the final test to get on the kidney transplant list on Wednesday, and on Friday she had a massive cardiac and respiratory event during dialysis where she passed again, but was kept alive on life support. I waited a week hoping for recovery, but we disconnected life support according to her wishes. We had talked about this many times. Story 13. I know 3 people who were clinically dead and came back. What they described is very different from what people are talking about here. They all said, paraphrasing, that it feels like passing out. One person compared it to overdosing on Whippet's nitrous oxide, a sensation of your consciousness slowly focusing into a single point in the middle of your head while your limbs lose feeling with a pleasant tingling, and then you lose consciousness. One woman said that when she regained consciousness she was hallucinating because she had no idea what was happening, and that she began dreaming of something safe, for example her mother hugging her in a warm bed. Story 14. My father died by suicide earlier this year, and the responses I read have helped me find some comfort in knowing his last moments were peaceful. I want to thank everyone who reached out. I will begin counseling soon to help get through the hard times. I am sorry for those who have experienced loss, and I am grateful we could share this feeling of peace, even if only for a moment. Story 15. I was on loads of morphine, so it is still hazy, and the fact it happened almost 6 years ago does not help my memory. I had appendicitis and my foster parents did not take me to the hospital until 2, almost 3, days after it had burst. I should have been dead well before they took me. Even the doctors called it a miracle. I died while waiting for surgery. I had to wait for a pediatric surgeon because no one else felt comfortable performing a surgery this serious on a child my size. They took me to the adult hospital instead of the pediatric hospital, which was 40 minutes away. I was 14, 5 feet 3 inches, and weighed 75 pounds soaking wet. While waiting for the surgeon I was in a room with the doctor, my 2 foster parents, and my grandmother, who is a registered nurse. I was very drugged and could not focus on much. The monitor I was hooked up to beeped loudly from time to time, and the intervals between beeps started to decrease rapidly. Turned out I was not breathing. I was conscious but kept forgetting to breathe. The doctors had to keep nudging me so I would not fall asleep. I remember being angry at the loud beeping because it kept me from sleeping. The doctor stepped out for a second, and my grandmother assured him she could look after me. She was furious with my foster parents and did not hold back. My grandmother is a sweet, devout Mormon from Utah without a rude bone in her body, but she screamed a lot at my foster parents. She did not notice I had passed out until the monitor signaled I had flatlined. This is the part where I died, and it is by far the most vivid. I remember being capable of thought but without actual thoughts. I can only describe it as being conscious of my spirit without a body to process those thoughts. I existed without feeling, thinking, or being anything. I was floating. At the time it felt calm. I do not remember visions of people, family, places, or anything like that, but I felt something wrap around me and comfort me. Without words I was assured I was okay and that there was nothing to worry about. At that point my thoughts returned. I knew, without knowing how long I would be able to keep thinking, that I had to go back. I did not want to, but I knew the last thing I would see before leaving mortal life would be my foster parents, the people who had abused me, neglected me, and treated me like a stain. I wanted to get back to my body, fix my life, and go live with my biological parents and feel loved again. In that moment, that was all I cared about. Then I sort of willed myself back. The doctors had tried to resuscitate me but had failed. Everyone was shocked when I opened my eyes. Seeing the tears in my grandmother's eyes after she thought she had lost me was everything. After that, I fixed my life. I reinvented myself and threw out the anger, depression, and rage that had put me in Brent and Karen's home. Honestly, in the last 5 years since I moved from their home, the only intense anger I feel, the burning hatred that makes you want to do anything to release it, is when I think about them and how they are still fostering youth in custody and probably doing the same things to those kids. I live about an hour away from them now, and I have to restrain myself from driving up there, kidnapping those kids, and taking them to the authorities with an explanation of why. The only reason I have not done that is because I have tried telling the authorities what kind of people they are. I guess the words of a juvenile screw-up do not carry as much weight as the lies from people who have practiced this for years. Sorry for the rant at the end. I know that was not entirely what you asked, but it felt good to type out. Thanks to the original poster for asking this question. It has been surprisingly therapeutic to talk about this. Story 16. I coded after surgery. I remember being able to see and hear everything and understand what was happening, but I could not physically feel anything. It was deeply unsettling. Story 17. I'm going to have to speak for my dad here. He passed away a few years ago. I wrote this out a while back, but maybe this is a relevant place for it. My dad was fearful in his last days. He had been to the hospital many times, and every time he came close to death, what he remembered did not match typical reports of near-death experiences. He had many bad experiences. In one case, he relived a day 3 times in a row while doctors sedated him. He was still fully aware. He could hear conversations, feel the pain, and feel the choking and suffocation. When I saw him the next day, he had tears in his eyes as he tried to ask how many days he had been out. When I told him one day, he was confused and it took him a while to understand. He thought he had gone to hell and that this was his eternal punishment. He wondered for a long time what he could have done to deserve that. He had always hated hospitals, and that experience made him hate them even more. On his last trip by ambulance, he actually walked to the ambulance. It was not the usual shortness of breath. It was chest pains. I thought this would be a short stay and he'd be back soon. During his last stay, he experienced more sedation, hallucinations, and disorientation. I visited him every day for updates. One night, they had trouble controlling his heart rate. It was steadily around 160 and would calm to about 120 before rising again. It was not good for him. The next time he was up, I walked in around dinner. He could barely speak. It took all his effort, but he had things to say. He said, "Son, I know without a doubt that there is an afterlife." I said, "Really?" He nodded. I asked, "How are you so sure? You've been seeing guns on the ceiling and all kinds of hallucinations." He said, "That wasn't me. I wasn't here." I asked, "You weren't here?" He said, "I was there." I asked, "Okay, well, did you see anyone you knew?" He shook his head. "It's not like that. You can see souls being born into life, and it's the most beautiful thing you can see. Everyone has their own color, and they're trying to get to white." I asked, "Trying to get to white?" He nodded. "Time doesn't exist there. Time is here because of us, and we're here because of time. Oh, I should have done more." He looked at his hands. "I could have been another Jimmy Page. I could have done more." I said, "But you were the greatest dad," and he smirked slightly to indicate he did not mean that. "Do more. Do everything you can." I said, "So, like carpe diem? Like seize the day?" He brightened. "Yes, do everything you can. Don't worry about the consequences. Everyone finds their way. People worry too much about the consequences. Just do good and do as much as you can. Everyone eventually gets there. Tell the family." I asked, "Can I tell everyone?" He said, "Yes, tell everyone." I said, "Okay, Dad, I'll tell everybody." He nodded in agreement. I could tell he was tired by then. I said, "I love you, Dad." He said, "I love you too, son." This was the last conversation I had with him. I miss him terribly and have been trying hard to find myself again after his passing. It's been a long time, and I've been able to cope enough to finally write this all out. I hope this finds someone who needs to hear it. With love, I just want to thank everyone for the wonderful, heartfelt, and deeply personal comments and messages that have been sent my way. I also want to thank the person who gilded this. I am truly overwhelmed by your kindness. Story 18. I died twice when methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus infected my heart after a major surgery. I do not remember much while I was unconscious. Cliché as it sounds, I saw a light. That year was awful. Story 19. This is not my story. The head of my program was in a horrible car accident. She was dead for a few minutes at the scene while paramedics worked on her. She said it was the most amazing feeling she had ever experienced. It was a blank, black nothingness, and that was perfectly fine. She felt a comfort she could not explain. When she returned to her body, she remembered being angry at the man working on her because she wanted to stay there. She said she cannot wait to experience it again when it is her time. She is not religious at all, and she dismisses ghost stories told by mortuary students because she only believes in tangible things. Her account fully made me a believer. I felt it was important to make a distinction she was very adamant about. She is not advocating suicide. She stressed that she is not trying to reach that place again, but that when it is her time she will be comfortable embracing it. Story 20. A friend of mine, who was technically dead twice, described death as being surrounded by darkness and floating while a warm gel-like substance covered her. She never wanted to leave that state. Story 21. Safe, paltry, sip, familiar, pie, label, afterthought, hobbies, jeans, screw. Story 22. I was electrocuted by about 13,800 volts. The doctors say the first shock likely stopped my heart and the second one restarted it before I was pulled to safety. I remember experiencing the darkest darkness and the most complete silence. I ceased to care that I was dying. Time seemed to change. What felt like hours was only about 30 seconds. I felt as though I was floating toward something that I eventually realized was my body and reality. When I rejoined my body, I became self-aware and heard the electricity making horrible noises. I knew I was in danger. After that, it was horribly painful. I lost most of my toes because of tissue death and suffered severe electrical burns on all 4 limbs. There were more surgeries than I care to count. Seeing the rounded bone ends of my freshly amputated toes still haunts me. Update. Thank you to everyone who helped me understand something that happened more than 12 years ago. I was an inpatient in the hospital for about a month, and then I received daily outpatient care for 10 months. I was released home for my mental sanity, but I still needed daily medical attention. I became addicted to painkillers, had to relearn how to walk, and worked with a pain management therapist. It was horrible at times, but eventually the pain began to subside. I went back to school, became an engineer, and I do not think I would be where I am without this experience. It is strange to think that I am in some way grateful now. I also cannot watch horror films anymore. Hollywood does a very realistic job. Update. Thank you, kind stranger, for the Gold Award. I will spend the day figuring out what that means. Warning, graphic content. I survived and I am okay. Story 23. I lost my younger brother 4 months ago to psychosis-induced suicide after years of painful, miserable addiction, anxiety, and depression. Many of these comments give me a sense of peace, as if he could no longer be here and needed to go. I hope he felt some relief in his final moments and was not in the constant pain he felt here and in his mind. Serious tag or not, I am glad most of the comments seem genuine. Thank you. Story 24. I do not know if this counts. I do not think I flatlined, but I had a huge postpartum hemorrhage after my second and last child was born. I lost 3 liters of blood, about half of my blood, which I believe is the highest classification of blood loss before death occurs. I was given general anesthesia before I passed out, but the lead-up was surreal. As someone mentioned, there is a sense of acceptance, of laying back and going with it. When I first started bleeding, I was scared and panicking. By the time I was being wheeled into the operating room, I was smiling at the midwife and telling her it would be okay. I was delirious and euphoric and not scared at all. My vision started to go, at first colored spots, then everything had a gray hue as tunnel vision set in. Sound became muffled, like putting my hands over my ears. Throughout, there was a feeling of indifference and no urge to fight. It was so calm that I do not think I have ever fully processed how lucky I am to be here. A near-death experience from blood loss, I can confirm, was not bad. The recovery, though, was awful. I felt terrible for weeks and developed post-traumatic stress disorder. I was so physically weak that I could barely care for the baby and had to inject myself with anticoagulant medication every day for 6 weeks. Story 25. I was dead for a very short time, about 30 seconds to a minute. There is a big misconception. It is not like sleeping at all. I always notice a low white noise in the back of my mind. It quiets down when I sleep but never disappears. I did not notice it before I died. But I do now. I do not want to romanticize death. But while I was out, it felt like a perfect nothingness. Nothingness is hard to imagine, but after experiencing it and being brought back by medical staff, part of me wished I could have stayed. There were no positive feelings, but it erased everything bad: stress, nightmares, troubles. It was simply nothing. In a way, it felt beautiful. I am not suicidal. I hope to live a long, happy life. Still, I look forward to the absence of consciousness when I eventually die, and I can honestly say I no longer fear death. Story 26. When I was 15, I was scheduled to have a tilt table test because I was consistently experiencing dizziness and fainting spells. After about 20 minutes, the doctor tilted the table back and I could feel myself passing out. I developed severe tunnel vision and lost about 95% of my eyesight, like looking through a straw, and then I blacked out. I remember hearing the doctor call a code and my father cursing at the doctor that he had killed me. I heard a lot of slamming and banging, which I assumed was the crash cart and nurses entering the small testing room. I felt pressure on my chest, like when someone stands on your back to crack it. I later learned the nurses were performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. I saw an array of vivid colors dancing and forming objects in the dark. The scariest thing was how peaceful it felt, pure calm and bliss. No panic, no pain, no sadness. I was clinically unresponsive for just under 2 minutes, and as soon as I came to and opened my eyes, I felt intensely angry and hostile. I started ripping off whatever I could get my hands on and yelling at the doctor to get me off the table. My heart had stopped because I had an undiagnosed heart condition, Wolff-Parkinson-White, which caused my heart to misfire. This account received more attention than I expected. I have tried to respond to many comments. If you have further questions or want more insight, feel free to send me a private message. Thanks to everyone who responded. Story 27. Not me, but right before my great-grandmother passed, she kept trying to describe vivid colors and smells. She kept saying how beautiful things were and that it was unlike anything she had ever seen. She was an extremely religious woman. A little while after the colors and smells, she told us that he said we had to say it was okay for her to go. My whole family was standing around saying goodbye. I vividly remember it even though I was only 9. Once we all said it was okay, she passed. The night before, she was talking to herself. We asked her what was going on, and she pointed at the chair across the room and said, "Please do not be rude. I am having a conversation with her." We were confused and asked about what, and she said the woman was explaining what we were going to do with our futures. It was strange. I will never know if it was real or what was happening, but it is kind of cool to think it might have been. Story 28. I was not necessarily clinically dead, but I was pronounced dead twice in the same night after a car accident when I was 16. My great-grandmother pulled me out of the car, and we walked through a peaceful field of flowers. When I woke up 2 weeks later, she was sitting on the edge of my bed and told me to tell my mother that everything would be okay. My great-grandmother had died when I was 10. Before that, she had been bedridden after a stroke, and I had never seen her walk or hear her speak. It was amazing and beautiful. Story 29. My mother saw a long corridor with arched doorways. One was open, and she said she refused to go in. She suffered a massive stroke at age 27 after a spinal tap performed a week earlier. Story 30. A former coworker of mine died during heart surgery. I think she was unconscious for about 90 seconds. She was not religious. She said she remembered being in the room and seeing her deceased uncle and cousins standing at the far end of the room, watching everything that was happening. Edit. Oh, now my inbox is having a near-death experience. Fun fact. She shared this information during an icebreaker when everyone was asked to give a fun fact about themselves. She did not remember seeing a light. She only saw her dead relatives at the end of the room. Story 31. I saw my grandfather. We talked for a while and he said I could go back with him or stay. I looked down and saw myself in a hospital bed with my brother holding my hand. He felt it turn cold, and I had never seen him cry like that before. I went back into my body and felt more pain than I had known in my life. It has been a year of recovery. I have lost most of my memory, but I am happy. I suffered a skull fracture and a traumatic brain injury from heat exhaustion. Photos captured my brother's reaction when I woke up and my mother playing music to try to rouse me. Story 32. This actually happened to me Monday into Tuesday morning. I was going through severe money problems and thought I was going to lose everything. I hanged myself in the closet. My fiancé found me, cut me down, and called emergency services at 911. I was blue and appeared dead in her arms. I had lost bladder control. My tongue is still swollen. I have no idea how that happened. Emergency medical technicians brought me back. I am still in the hospital and do not expect to be discharged soon. I saw nothing, just darkness. No sounds, no white light, nothing but black. The next thing I knew, I woke up in an ambulance. Suicide is terrible. Do not try it. People love you. If you are in immediate danger, call emergency services now. If you are in the United States, call or text 988 for the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. If you are elsewhere, please contact your local emergency services or a local suicide prevention hotline. If you want to talk or need help finding resources, I am here to help. Story 33. I wonder whether people who have tried dimethyltryptamine and ayahuasca have also had near-death experiences. Are the experiences as similar as people say? Story 34. I was 6 or 7 years old when my parents rushed me to the hospital because they heard me breathing loudly and with difficulty. The last things I remembered were the faces of the doctors and nurses above me as I lay on my back. Then I flatlined. The strangest, unexplainable thing happened then. I suddenly saw the whole scene as a spectator, as if I were a floating spirit in the room. I could see myself being revived, my mother crying, and my father comforting her. I saw a white entity shaped like my body fall through the ceiling, slowly drifting like a leaf until it settled inside my body. That experience ended there. I was put in a medically induced coma and woke up after a few days. I had things attached to me, including an intravenous line and a red pulse oximeter on my finger. Later, I told the doctors that I had seen everything, including them using the defibrillators and my parents. No one believed me. They said I was probably dreaming and that my memories might have been influenced by watching television. But I know what I saw. I do not recall the exact cause of my hospitalization, but it began with an asthma attack combined with heart failure. My memories from that time are a mess. I spent a lot of time in hospitals and took heart medications and steroids until my mid-teens. I wish I remembered more, but I was never fully informed. I just went along with the doctors, my parents, and the medicines. About the defibrillators, I am still unsure. I could have sworn I saw them preparing the defibrillators just after they performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation on me for some time. Maybe they used them after my pulse returned. Maybe I was hallucinating, as some have suggested. One more detail I remembered. While I was in the spectator state, I saw a nurse hand a paper to my mother for her to sign. When I later asked her what she had signed that night, she said she had no idea because I had been unconscious. It turned out to be insurance paperwork. I have had a congenital heart defect since birth. I do not know the exact name, but it involved part of my heart not opening or closing properly, which caused sharp stabbing pains in my chest occasionally. Those symptoms are gone now, and I am no longer on medication. Story 35. I don't share it much, but I've had 4 heart surgeries. In my first and third ones I coded. For these surgeries you had to be conscious to get your heart to react appropriately. The first time was just nothingness. Black. Just nothing. I can't even explain how long it felt. Then I remember waking up with them over me saying, "We lost you for a second there. Are you okay?" The second time is the hard one to share. I woke up in a kind of subway-like tunnel, but everything was white, the subway, the tunnel walls we were speeding through. I didn't have a body per se. Sometimes it felt like I was the subway, other times like I was looking out a window at the tunnel wall. Came to a stop, and there was black nothingness again. Then I heard the voice of a much older man. He said, "Are you ready to go?" I had nothing. I didn't know how to speak. "We're going now if you're ready," he added. Something inside me felt so ready to go, like a magnet pulling me toward this unknown destination in the black ahead. I remember finally saying, "Oh, okay." He asked again in a slightly different tone, "We'll be leaving here. You are ready to go?" Something in me snapped, and I remembered I had a life and people I would leave behind. My first thought was, I can't leave my girlfriend. I couldn't do that. And my mom and dad, my puppies, I can't leave any of them. My family, my friends. I made a decision. I couldn't leave. I didn't even have to say it. Once I decided I would stay, I woke up and came to consciousness with the medical team all around me. Story 36. I overdosed on caffeine and had a weak heartbeat. Before it happened, I was hallucinating and could not see clearly. All my fear faded away instantly. Then everything just went black, and it felt like I was asleep, but I did not remember when I fell and lost consciousness. I woke up when my heart restarted, wanting to stay in that sleepy state. Story 37. Not me personally, but my grandmother, after giving birth to my uncle, was clinically dead for a short time. She told me she felt herself rising out of her body and ended up in the top corner of the room with a view of her bed and the doctor. She then willed herself back into her body and was alive again. Update. After reading more accounts, it seems this has happened to many people. I used to think she was a bit crazy because it was the story she gave to explain her belief in God and the afterlife, but now I think there may be truth in her account. Story 38. Not me, but my grandfather. He underwent triple bypass surgery and his vital signs dropped. During the operation, he said he suddenly found himself lying in his bed at home. Friends and family who had died were waving him over and telling him to come home. He told them not yet and returned to his body. Story 39. This happened well before my girlfriend and I got together. She intentionally overdosed on methadone and was briefly clinically dead at the hospital. She said she could see the doctors and her husband in the room from above. Then she found herself in a meadow with her first boyfriend, talking as if nothing had happened. She felt herself being pulled out of the meadow abruptly. She suddenly sat up, her eyes wide open, and came back to life. Story 40. Not me, but my late grandfather was clinically dead in the hospital intensive care unit after surgery many years ago, around 1990. He was in his 80s with multiple illnesses, including diabetes and a broken hip. One night in the intensive care unit, he went into cardiac arrest. They resuscitated him. When he woke, he asked a nurse how the little boy was doing. The nurse asked what little boy. He said the little black boy with the gunshot wounds and asked how he was. The nurse said he was going to be okay. He asked other questions about patients who had been brought into the emergency room at the exact time he was clinically dead and on a different floor of the hospital. When people asked how he knew about those emergency room patients, he said he was floating and that he saw them. He saw the staff working on himself, then floated to the emergency room and saw those patients. Multiple hospital employees and other witnesses corroborated this. I was silently amazed that they showed little astonishment. It seemed this had happened to other patients before. Story 41. When I was very young, I had a serious case of epiglottitis that left me clinically dead for a moment. It felt like a dream in which I was in the sky, like an angel or Cupid looking down at myself in the hospital, with doctors and nurses surrounding me and my mother crying. I did not seem to care, but I remember thinking that I wanted to go back. I was about 3 years old, and I still remember this quite vividly. It felt like an out-of-body experience. This was certainly influenced by the fact that my parents are Catholic and I enjoyed looking at Cupids in paintings because they looked a bit like me when I was young. At least that is what I tell myself. Story 42. My dad clinically died for over a minute during a procedure after an iodine drip, despite a documented severe iodine allergy. He described an out-of-body experience. There was complete silence and he was a spectator in the upper corner of the room, watching the staff scramble to revive him. He had no concept of time or of the panic below. He just observed in total peace. He saw one nurse finally notice his allergy bracelet and alert everyone to the problem. They cut the drip and continued their efforts to revive him. Although he was watching the end of his life, he felt extreme peace and was pain-free for the first time in years. He knew he was dying and was ready and content. Everything grew bright and he began to float upward until a man he did not recognize told him it was not his time yet. Suddenly he was jolted back into his body and came to. Once stable, he described what he had witnessed and thanked the nurse who had noticed his bracelet. They were all baffled that he knew such detail. I can only hope that when he passed away 4 years ago, it was an even more peaceful experience than this. It gives me peace to know that he had faced death already, so he was not afraid when it came again. Story 43. This is secondhand from my dad, but he was always a little shaken when he told this story. Years before I was born, my dad was riding his motorcycle when a small dog ran into the road barking. He swerved to avoid the dog, and a car in oncoming traffic also swerved. My dad was clipped and thrown from his bike. It happened on a hill, so he slid a long way until his body hit a parked car. The strange part is that he always got a haunted look when he talked about it, which was rare. He said he remembered standing at the bottom of the street on the corner, watching a man get hit off his bike and tumble through the air down the hill. He remembered thinking that the man was definitely going to die. He woke up the next day in the hospital with a nurse picking gravel out of his back. He had reconstructive surgery on his hand and arm and now has metal pins. Remember, children, if you ride a motorcycle, always wear protective clothing and a helmet. Without them, my dad would have died and I would not be here. Story 44. I was hit by a car while riding a bicycle without a helmet when I was 17. I suffered a traumatic brain injury, including a brain bleed that led to a condition called status epilepticus. I survived but was close to dying. My heart was beating, but I was without oxygen for a long time. I woke up in the hospital nearly 2 weeks later in severe pain and had an intense headache. I had a strange memory of a dreamlike state where I dreamed in 8-bit graphics like Mario, except it was a field of flowers and a bunny rabbit. It was quiet, and I felt numb. I was riding my bike 1 minute and gone the next. It was a traumatic event, and I still have issues with it nearly 15 years later. Story 45. I nearly drowned in the ocean as a child. A lifeguard on his first day of training saw me thrashing from a quarter-mile away and reached me after I had filled my lungs with salt water and sank. I remember him gripping my arm before I completely blacked out. By the way, drowning is a very comfortable way to go. After the struggle and the convulsive intake of water, there is a warm serenity. With my heart and lungs stopped, trained lifeguards pronounced me dead on the beach, but they continued cardiopulmonary resuscitation until the paramedics arrived and shocked me back to life. To this day, I remember the incident vividly, both physically and mentally, far more clearly than any other childhood memory. The brief period when I was pronounced dead was a black hole of unconsciousness. The scariest moment came after I was shocked back to life and was too weak to move. I felt a paramedic undoing the drawstring of my shorts. My feeble brain registered that he was going to show everyone my genitals before I blacked out again. Story 46. My grandmother, when she was a child, was walking her dog when she was hit by a car. She and her dog struck a fire hydrant, and in that instant she rose up above the city block she had been on. A voice told her, "Look at your mother. You cannot go. You have a lot to do." She came to in the hospital. She tried to close her eyes to go back and cried because it had been so peaceful. Story 47. I was resuscitated after attempting suicide with Ativan, which was a mistake. My son had passed away 3 years earlier, and I remember going to a place without time and watching him grow up without the neonatal Marfan syndrome and hydrocephalus that killed him. I should point out that I lost consciousness before a code was called, so I do not remember rising out of my body. I do remember slamming back into it after being shocked. That was no fun. My life changed completely afterward. I left my wife, who was not helping me with my struggles with Marfan syndrome. I had the courage to come out as transgender and found a woman who supports me and loves me. I do not worry about anything but love and taking care of the people around me, because life is too short for anything else. A visit with my son sorted it all out. Story 48. Hey everyone. All the descriptions of death in this thread sound pretty euphoric, but if you are thinking of suicide, please reach out and get help. There is nothing magical about the effect it has on families. Story 49. I don't know if this counts, but I had surgery on my hip in February 2009 because I'd been in a car accident. When I was coming out of surgery, it was discovered that I had been slightly overdosed on anesthetic. They never found out by how much. Instead of the typical time in the recovery room, I spent about 2.5 hours there. I kept falling asleep and ceasing to breathe every 30 to 60 seconds for over an hour. Every time I faded out, everything went black. I felt and saw nothing. There was no fear or pain. I remember feeling incredibly calm, like I was being torn between two completely different dimensions each time I alternated between being conscious and slipping away. Interestingly, it was my mother yelling at me to breathe that kept waking me up. It was a really strange experience. I don't know if I was clinically dead because the periods were so short, but it definitely made me less afraid of dying. I'm sure this will sound insane to some, but I'm convinced that there is a lot we don't know about the universe, and I believe our consciousness is part of it. I believe firmly that when we die, we don't cease to exist. We have always been here and always will be, just like everything that exists now was once a simple collection of hydrogen atoms. The universe took a long time to develop what would become consciousness, and bodies to house it so that it could finally observe itself. Bodies don't last forever. We should all feel incredibly lucky to have been given the chance to be part of an existence that is alive and self-aware. I know I do. Story 50. I have never died. I have been present with hundreds of people before they died, and almost 100% of them were at peace. Families are never ready, but the person is. It is eerily beautiful how many people have told me it is okay and that they are ready to die. Story 51. Many people describe a floating feeling, viewing the hospital room from above and observing themselves. Interesting. Story 52. People who say they were aware of everything but were unable to move are my nightmare. That is one of the reasons I want to be cremated. I cannot stand the thought of being trapped in my own dead body forever. Story 53. This is my mother's story. I was privileged to be there when she talked to her doctor the next day and to witness his reaction. She had been afraid to die. After this experience, she was no longer afraid and started enjoying life more, seizing the day, if you will. My mother was in the hospital being treated for a reaction to arthritis medication. This was more than 30 years ago, so procedures have changed. She was in a bed far from the nurse's station because she was stable and in no danger. For some reason, her heart stopped. They never found out why. The nurse found her without a pulse and called a code. My mother, meanwhile, had left her body and was floating up by the ceiling. She felt no fear, only wonder at what was happening and pity for the poor body lying on the bed because it was so sick and damaged. She had many health problems. As the team worked on her without success, the attending physician went down the hall to the nurse's desk. My mother was curious about what he was going to say, so she followed him and listened. He was upset and said he had no idea why her heart had stopped or why it was not starting again, and he told the nurses to call her personal doctor. He returned to her room and she followed him back. They continued working on her. She said she had no feeling of fear or regret. She had been physically disabled for some time and was enjoying the freedom of movement and the lack of pain. She saw the light, not hugely bright but more a feeling of peace and safety, and she felt that her parents were near. My mother, being my mother, was more interested in what was happening to her and her body. If you were dead, it would be good to know why. The attending physician finally did something that worked to start her heart, and she said she was sucked back in. She was very angry because she knew she was about to start a wonderful adventure and the doctor had spoiled it. She said she did not want to be in that heavy, disabled body. She struggled to get back out but was held back. And then the drugs they gave her worked and she became unconscious. My sister and I were sitting with her the next day. She was in a lot of pain from the chest compressions and was upset that she did not get to go on her adventure. We were making Hobbit jokes when the attending physician came in to check on her. She asked him why they did not know what had happened and why her heart had stopped. He did not know what to say. She told him she had left her body and had seen what happened. He patronized her and started to explain hallucinations and oxygen deprivation to the brain. She cut him off and demanded to know how she could have known what he had said at the nurse's station at the end of the hall if she had not been there. She proceeded to repeat his conversation with the nurse. The doctor looked as if he had seen a ghost. His face went white and he spun on his heel and bolted for the door. He actually bounced off both sides of the door before he could get out. That is how fast he was going. She said later that she never saw him again. My mother was never religious and did not become so now. Instead, she became more spiritual, something she had previously had no interest in. She felt more at peace with herself and her condition and started to pay more attention to the little things people ignore in their rush, like sunsets and butterflies. She had been buying all kinds of things, typical of people who do not want to admit they are very ill. It is a way of staying connected with life. She stopped this behavior and said she did not need material things where she was going. She always said it with a smile. She asked that I share her story so people know that there really is something after death. It is interesting and not at all scary. It has nothing to do with religion. What happens afterward just seemed to be a fact, like gravity. She said she was surprised that she was not surprised. She died about a year later, and I am sure, since she had an inquisitive mind, that she is enjoying herself. On a slightly different note, I have had several dogs who returned after they passed. The only ones who came back had huge personalities and seemed to feel real ownership of the house. The best story is about Joe, a little black dachshund beagle mix who ruled the house for 10 years. The night after she passed, my ex heard her at the door. There was no mistaking her scratch and bark. I heard her too, as did the other dogs. He did not believe in ghosts but opened the door and called to her. Honey, our Doberman, was lounging in Joe's chair, and she jumped up as if she had been shot. The other two dogs milled around as if they were greeting someone. I could not see her, but I talked to her as if she were there and explained what had happened and that she was to go on over the Rainbow Bridge. I would join her when I could. The next morning when I came downstairs, Honey was in Joe's chair and made it clear that it was now hers. I think Joe gave it to her. She always was a benevolent queen. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.